I sat in the passenger seat watching her hands grip the steering wheel, and I realized I had no idea where my car was or how I would get back to it. I'm a 28-year-old software contractor working remotely while finishing my degree part-time. Between client calls and assignments, dating happens almost entirely through apps now. I don't have time to meet people organically, don't have coworkers to grab drinks with after work, don't frequent the same coffee shops or gyms where those chance encounters are supposed to happen. So I swipe through profiles in the evenings, between assignments, looking for someone who might want to get dinner or see a movie. It feels mechanical, but it's the reality of modern dating when you work from home, and your social circle has shrunk to almost nothing. I matched with someone named Maya on a Thursday. Her profile showed her at a hiking trail, at a brewery with friends, at what looked like a work event. She had dark hair and an easy smile, and her bio said she worked in public administration. We talked for 3 days, the conversation flowing naturally, and she suggested meeting at a wine bar on Saturday evening. The place was equidistant from both our apartments, a compromise location that felt safe and neutral. I arrived first and got a table near the window. She showed up 10 minutes later and looked like her photos, maybe prettier in person. We ordered wine and appetizers and talked about work and school and the city. She told me she worked as an office administrator at a municipal building, handling scheduling and records requests, nothing exciting but stable. I told her about my contract work and the degree program I was trying to finish before my GI Bill benefits expired. Within the first 20 minutes, she mentioned that her roommate was visiting family for Thanksgiving week and the apartment felt too empty. She said she hated being alone because an ex-boyfriend had shown up at her building twice in the past month, just standing outside her door, not saying anything, just watching. I felt my posture stiffen and I asked if she'd reported it to the police. She laughed and waved her hand dismissively and said he was mostly harmless, just dramatic and unable to let go of their relationship. She said he'd leave eventually and find someone else to fixate on. The way she said it felt rehearsed, like she'd told this story before and refined it each time. I told her that didn't sound harmless at all, and she changed the subject, asking me about my time in the Navy. We stayed for another hour and had 3 glasses of wine between us, maybe 4. The conversation stayed light and easy, and I found myself relaxing into it, enjoying her company. When she suggested we go back to her place, I didn't hesitate. She was attractive, and we'd been flirting, and it seemed like the natural progression of the evening. But then she insisted on driving. I told her I was fine to drive myself and meet her there, but she said I'd been drinking and she saw too many DUI cases come through her office, and she didn't want me to risk it. I'd had 2 glasses of wine over 90 minutes, and I felt completely sober. But she kept pressing, saying it was safer if she drove and I could pick up my car in the morning. It felt strange, but I told myself she was just being cautious, responsible. I agreed and got into her car. Her building was a low-rise apartment complex about 15 minutes away, the kind with exterior hallways and metal railings and numbered parking spaces. She parked and we walked up the outdoor stairs to the second floor. When we reached her door, she walked straight up and turned the handle and pushed it open. She didn't unlock it. The door was already unlocked. I stopped in the doorway and asked if she'd forgotten to lock it when she left. She paused and said her roommate must have left it open by accident when she left for the airport. But she'd already told me the roommate had been gone for 2 days. I pointed that out and she laughed and said she must have forgotten to lock it herself then. She'd been in a hurry to meet me. The explanation felt weak, but I followed her inside. The apartment was dim, only the kitchen light on, and it smelled faintly of cleaning products and something else. Something stale. The layout was simple, a small living room connected to a galley kitchen, a hallway leading to what I assumed were the bedrooms and bathroom. She walked to the kitchen and started opening cabinets, looking for something. On the counter, I noticed a bowl of cereal, milk still pooled at the bottom, cornflakes floating but barely softened. I walked over and touched the side of the bowl. It was cold but not room temperature, like it had been sitting there for maybe 30 minutes, maybe less. I asked whose cereal it was. She turned and looked at the bowl and hesitated, just a fraction of a second, before saying she'd eaten it as a snack before leaving to meet me. But that didn't make sense. If she'd eaten it before leaving, it would have been sitting there for at least 2 hours. The milk would be warmer, the cereal would be soggy. I started to say something, but before I could finish the sentence, she crossed the space between us and kissed me. Her arms sliding around my neck, her body pressing against mine. She pulled back and smiled and took my hand and led me down the hallway to her bedroom. The room was neat, bed made, curtains open. The window faced the parking lot and the exterior hallway, light from the street lamps casting shadows across the walls. I moved toward the window to close the curtains and she told me to leave them open. I asked why, and she said she liked the light. It felt odd, but I let it go. We started kissing again and moved to the bed. Maybe 5 minutes passed, maybe 10. I was facing away from the window, my back to the glass. She was looking over my shoulder and suddenly she let out a gasp, sharp and frightened, her eyes wide and locked on something behind me. I turned and saw a figure standing outside the window, just a silhouette in a hooded sweatshirt, close enough that I could see the shape of a face in the shadow. The figure turned and ran. I heard footsteps pounding on the exterior walkway, heavy and fast. I jumped up and ran to the front door. It was unlocked again. I locked it, and as soon as the deadbolt slid into place, someone started pounding on the door from the outside, fists hammering against the wood. I moved toward the door, ready to open it and confront whoever was out there, but Maya grabbed my arm and told me to come back to the bedroom. I shouted at her, asked if she was insane, asked what was happening. She said he does this sometimes and he always leaves eventually and I shouldn't worry about it. I asked if she knew it was her ex and she said yes, like it was obvious, like this was routine. The pounding stopped and then I heard it again on the side of the building, near the kitchen window, the same heavy rhythmic banging. She didn't look scared. She looked calm, almost annoyed, like this was an inconvenience rather than a threat. She kept trying to coax me back to the bedroom, her voice soft and soothing, saying it would be fine. He'd leave soon. We should just ignore him. I felt panic rising in my chest, my thoughts racing. I thought about calling the police, but she worked in a municipal building. She probably knew half the officers in this district, and who would they believe? I couldn't leave because my car was miles away at the wine bar. I started pacing, running through scenarios in my head. I thought about the unlocked door, the cereal, the figure at the window, the pounding. It felt coordinated, planned. I told her if this was a robbery or some kind of setup, I'd fight both of them. I wasn't trying to sound tough, I'm not a tough guy. But my fear told me I needed to let her know I wouldn't be an easy victim. She looked at me like I was overreacting, like I was being dramatic. I pulled out my phone and opened a rideshare app and requested a pickup without telling her. I kept arguing with her, asking what was going on, why her door had been unlocked, whose cereal that was, hoping to keep her talking and distracted until the car arrived. I stayed near the front door so I could leave as soon as possible. The pounding had stopped, but I could still feel adrenaline coursing through me, my hands shaking. The notification came that the driver was 2 minutes away, then 1 minute, then outside. I didn't say anything. I grabbed my jacket from the chair by the door and walked out. She stood in the doorway watching me leave, but didn't say anything, didn't try to stop me. I ran down the stairs and got into the car and told the driver to go. On the ride back to the wine bar, I reported her profile on the app, flagging it for suspicious activity. When I got to my car, I went back inside the bar and found the bartender who'd served us. I described Maya and told him what had happened and asked him to warn anyone who came in asking about a woman matching her description. He looked concerned and said he would. I drove home and didn't sleep that night. I kept running through the details, trying to piece together what had actually been happening. It felt like a robbery, like maybe the ex-boyfriend was supposed to come in while we were distracted and take my wallet and keys. Or maybe it was something worse, something I didn't want to think about. I have no idea what I interrupted that night. I'm angry at myself for ignoring the signs, for getting in her car, for going to her apartment, for trusting someone I just met. The hiring manager introduced himself as Peter and said I'd be working closely with him on all client accounts. I'm a 34-year-old graphic designer, and this was my first in-house position after years of freelancing from my apartment. Freelancing had been isolating, working alone every day with minimal human interaction, and I'd been excited about the prospect of an office environment, of collaborating with a team, of having coworkers to talk to during lunch breaks. The agency was small, just 8 people working out of a renovated warehouse space downtown. Peter was the creative director and part owner, early 40s, with an easy confidence and an impressive portfolio. During my interview, he talked about his philosophy of collaborative design, how he believed the best work came from open dialogue and shared creative ownership. It sounded ideal. In the first week, he asked me to stay late twice to review pitch decks for upcoming client presentations. Both times, he ordered dinner for everyone who stayed, pizza or Thai food, and we worked in the conference room with music playing and the energy feeling casual and productive. It felt generous, like he was investing in the team's success and willing to put in the same hours he was asking of us. The second week, he asked if I could come in on Saturday to finalize a presentation for a Monday morning client meeting. The client was a major retail brand, and the pitch was important, and he wanted everything perfect. I said yes because I wanted to prove I was committed, that I was taking the job seriously, that I could be relied on. Saturday was just the two of us in the office. He worked alongside me for 3 hours, adjusting layouts and refining color palettes and discussing typography choices. Then he suggested we take a break and get lunch. We walked to a sandwich shop 2 blocks away and sat at a table by the window. The conversation shifted from work to personal topics. He talked about his divorce, how it had been finalized the previous year, how his ex-wife had primary custody of their teenage daughter, and he only saw her every other weekend. He said work was the only stable thing in his life right now, the only place where he felt like he had control and purpose. I felt sorry for him. He seemed lonely, vulnerable in a way that made me want to be supportive. The following week, he asked me to review some branding mock-ups at his apartment. He said he'd been working from home with a cold and didn't want to come into the office and get everyone sick. But he needed a second set of eyes on the concepts before sending them to the client in the morning. I hesitated. Going to his apartment felt like crossing a boundary, but he framed it as necessary and urgent, and I didn't want to seem uncooperative. When I arrived, his apartment was immaculate, modern furniture and art on the walls, and everything in its place. He'd made coffee and set up his laptop on the dining table. We worked for about 45 minutes, reviewing comps and discussing revisions. He sat closer than necessary, leaning over my shoulder to point at elements on the screen, his arm occasionally brushing against mine. When we finished, he asked if I wanted to stay for a drink. He opened the cabinet and showed me a selection of expensive whiskey and wine. I said I had plans with a friend and needed to leave. He looked disappointed but didn't push. I left feeling unsettled but told myself I was reading too much into it. The requests kept escalating in small increments. He started texting me on evenings and weekends, asking my opinion on things that didn't require immediate answers. He'd send me screenshots of design work and ask what I thought, or forward me articles about design trends and ask if I'd read them. He'd send me restaurant recommendations and ask if I'd tried them, or concert listings and ask if I was planning to go. It felt like he was trying to insert himself into my personal life, to create a relationship that extended beyond work hours. I kept my responses polite but brief, trying to maintain professional distance without being rude. He invited me to a concert, said a client had given him tickets he couldn't use, and he didn't want them to go to waste. I hesitated, but he said other team members would be there too. When I arrived at the venue, it was just him. He said the others had canceled at the last minute. We went in, and he stayed close to me in the crowd, his hand occasionally touching my back or my arm, guiding me through the space. When I stepped away to create distance, he followed. After the show, he suggested we get drinks, and I said I was tired and needed to get home. He looked hurt, like I'd rejected him personally rather than just declined an invitation. He began criticizing my work in front of the team during review meetings. Small things that didn't matter, subjective choices that could go either way. He'd point out that a color was slightly off or a font choice wasn't quite right, and then offer to help me fix it privately. He started scheduling one-on-one meetings in the conference room, supposedly to give me feedback on projects, but the feedback was vague and the meetings felt like excuses to be alone with me. He'd sit next to me instead of across the table, close enough that I could smell his cologne, and he'd talk about how he saw potential in me and wanted to mentor me and help me develop my skills. The mentorship framing felt like a justification for the increased attention. He started commenting on my appearance in ways that felt inappropriate. He'd say I looked tired and ask if everything was okay at home. He'd notice if I changed my hair or wore something new and make a point of complimenting it in front of others. He'd ask if I was dating anyone, framing it as casual conversation, but the question felt loaded. One Friday afternoon, he told me the client presentation we'd been working on had been selected for a pitch meeting Monday morning in another city. and he'd booked us both on a 6 a.m. flight and reserved a hotel room for Sunday night. I said I couldn't go on such short notice. I had commitments over the weekend and hadn't packed. He said the client had specifically requested me to present the design concepts. I said that was flattering, but I still couldn't go. He looked annoyed. I checked with the client coordinator, a woman named Jennifer who handled all scheduling, and she had no record of me being requested for the meeting. She said Peter was the only one presenting. When I confronted him, he said there must have been a miscommunication, that he'd assumed the client wanted me there based on their feedback during previous calls. The explanation felt like a lie. I realized he'd fabricated the request to create a scenario where we'd be traveling together, staying in the same hotel, spending the evening and following morning in close proximity. I stopped staying late. I stopped responding to non-urgent texts. I kept conversations brief and focused on work. He noticed the change and started scheduling more one-on-one meetings, asking why I seemed distant, saying he thought we had a good working relationship and he was concerned that something had changed. He said he'd invested time in mentoring me and felt hurt that I was pulling away. I realized he'd constructed a narrative where I owed him something, where his attention and guidance created an obligation. The dynamic felt manipulative, and I didn't know how to extract myself without causing conflict. I started documenting everything. I took screenshots of messages, noting dates and times of meetings, keeping a log of comments he made and situations that felt inappropriate. I went to HR, a woman named Sandra who worked part-time and handled payroll and benefits and employee issues. I explained the situation as objectively as I could, showing her the message threads and the timeline. She listened and took notes and said she'd look into it, but then reminded me that Peter was a senior partner and part owner of the agency. The implication was clear. My complaint would be difficult to substantiate and even more difficult to act on. 2 weeks later, Sandra called me into her office and said they'd decided to move me to a different team, working primarily with the other creative director on accounts that didn't involve Peter. She framed it as professional development, an opportunity to diversify my experience and work with different types of clients. I knew it was their solution to the problem, easier to move me than to address his behavior. Peter sent me an email that evening saying he was disappointed I'd gone to HR instead of talking to him directly, that he'd only ever tried to help me and support my career, and that he felt betrayed by my actions. The email felt like a final attempt to make me feel guilty, to reframe his behavior as benevolent and my response as ungrateful. I left the agency 4 months later, as soon as I'd secured another position. I didn't give a reason beyond pursuing other opportunities. I still feel anxious when I see his name on LinkedIn or when mutual contacts mention the agency. I wonder if he's doing the same thing to someone else, if there's another young designer being subjected to the same gradual escalation, the same boundary violations disguised as mentorship and support. The apartment listing called it a garden-level studio in a historic neighborhood, available for short-term rental. I'm a 26-year-old graduate student and I'd flown to Edinburgh for an academic conference. Just 2 nights, and the university stipend didn't cover hotels. I'd searched for the cheapest options and found this place listed for £40 per night, significantly less than anything else in the area. The host's name was Callum, and he had 5 positive reviews, all from several years ago, all brief and generic. Good location, clean space, would stay again. The lack of recent reviews should have been a warning, but I was focused on the price. I arrived at the address in the late afternoon, dragging my suitcase down a narrow cobblestone street lined with tall stone townhouses. The building was darker than its neighbors, the facade stained and weathered, the windows on the ground floor covered with heavy curtains. There was an iron gate that creaked when I pushed it open and overgrown hedges blocking the lower windows. The front steps were cracked and uneven. I rang the bell and waited. No one came. I rang again and waited 5 minutes, shifting my weight from foot to foot, wondering if I had the wrong address. I heard shuffling inside, but the door didn't open. I crouched down and looked through the mail slot and was shocked by what I saw. The entrance looked like an abandoned building, like no one had lived there in years. There was a dusty couch directly in front of the door, pieces of furniture covered in cloth sheets, boxes stacked against the walls, everything dim and neglected. I stood up and checked the address on my phone again. It matched the listing. I considered leaving, but I didn't have another place to stay, and it was getting dark. An older man appeared on the sidewalk, walking slowly toward the building. He looked to be in his 70s, unshaven, wearing a stained undershirt and loose sweatpants. He smelled like cigarettes, the odor strong even from several feet away. I asked if he knew where the Airbnb was, and he mumbled something I couldn't quite understand. I asked if he was Callum, my host, and he nodded and pulled a set of keys from his pocket and unlocked the door. Inside was exactly as I'd seen through the mail slot, only worse. The air smelled like mildew and smoke and something rotting. The wallpaper was peeling in the corners, water stains spreading across the ceiling. He motioned for me to follow him and started climbing a narrow staircase. His breathing labored, coughing every few steps. The second floor was similarly abandoned, furniture clustered together and covered with sheets, no lights on, curtains blocking what little daylight remained. He pointed to another staircase and we climbed to the third floor. My hallway was lined with old rural paintings in tarnished frames and wooden crosses hung at intervals along the walls. The aesthetic was oppressive, like a set from a horror film. He showed me to a bedroom at the end of the hall. The room itself wasn't terrible. There was a single bed with clean sheets, a nightstand, a small dresser. But on the shelves were dozens of porcelain dolls, old and cracked, their painted faces staring down at me. I usually don't mind that kind of decor. I've always been drawn to darker aesthetics. But everything looked so badly maintained, so neglected, that the overall effect was deeply unsettling. He showed me to the bathroom, which had a huge hole in the tiling around the bathtub, the edges jagged and crumbling. The grout was black with mold. On the edge of the tub were half-empty bottles of shampoo and body wash, different brands, like previous guests had left them behind and no one had bothered to clean them up. I asked if there was Wi-Fi, and he said no. I asked what time checkout was, and he said, whenever, it didn't matter. He shuffled away, and I heard his footsteps climbing another flight of stairs to what I assumed was the fourth floor. I tested the door to my room, and there was no lock. I went back to the bathroom, and there was no lock there either, not on the outer door and not on the toilet. I felt exposed and unsafe. I decided I wouldn't stay the night. I walked to a cafe several blocks away and used their Wi-Fi to message a friend who lived in Edinburgh. She said I could stay with her and gave me her address. I felt relieved, but I still needed to go back and get my suitcase. I walked back to the building as it was getting dark. I approached quietly and looked through the mail slot again before going inside. The old man was now asleep on the couch directly in front of the entrance, wearing what looked like a cartoon character onesie, like something a child would wear. There was an oxygen tank beside him, a clear tube running from the tank to his nose. The sight was so bizarre and unexpected that I froze for a moment, trying to process what I was seeing. I unlocked the gate and went inside, moving as quietly as possible. I climbed the stairs to my floor and approached the bedroom. My door was open. I was certain I'd closed it before leaving. Inside, everything looked the same except the hair straightener I'd left unplugged on the dresser was now warm to the touch. Someone had used it while I was gone. I felt my skin crawl. I grabbed my suitcase and went back downstairs, stepping carefully, trying not to make any noise. The old man was still asleep on the couch. I tried to step over the oxygen tube, but my foot caught it and the tube pulled out of the tank. The hissing sound was immediate and loud. The old man woke up gasping and reaching for the tube. I said I was sorry, I kept saying it, and then I ran out the door. I reported the listing when I got to my friend's flat. She was horrified by the story and said I should have left immediately. Shouldn't have even gone inside. The platform removed the listing 3 days later. I still wonder who else stayed there, who used that hair straightener, why no one had left recent reviews warning others away. My brother graduated with a finance degree and moved to Calgary for a job at a consulting firm. We used to talk every week, mostly over video calls while playing an online racing game we'd both loved since we were teenagers. He was doing well, making friends through work, dating occasionally, adjusting to life in a new city. We'd always been close growing up, family dinners and game nights and road trips, the kind of sibling relationship where you actually enjoy each other's company. Then, last January, he mentioned he'd started attending a church near his apartment. Someone from work had invited him, and he'd gone one Sunday out of curiosity. I didn't think much of it. Our family isn't particularly religious, but we're not opposed to it either. My parents raised us with the attitude that people should find their own path when it comes to faith and spirituality. Over the next 2 months, he talked about the church more frequently, how welcoming everyone was, how the pastor had taken an interest in mentoring him. He said he was attending Bible study on Wednesday evenings and volunteering on Saturday mornings, helping with administrative tasks and event planning. He started skipping our weekly gaming sessions, saying he had church commitments. When we did talk, he seemed distracted, his attention divided. In March, he came home for a long weekend. My mother said the visit felt wrong from the moment he arrived. He seemed different, quieter, less physically affectionate. He used to hug everyone when he arrived, asking about their weeks and genuinely listening to the answers. This time, he barely made eye contact. He spent most of the visit sitting alone reading a religious text, declining invitations to watch movies or play board games like we used to. At dinner, he was silent, observing the rest of us, but not participating in the conversation. When my mother hugged him goodbye, he didn't hug back. She called me after he left and said she didn't recognize him. I tried calling him more often, but he rarely answered. When he did, he only wanted to talk about the church. He talked about his relationship with God, about sin and redemption, about the importance of dedicating his life to spiritual growth. I asked general questions about his job and his life in Calgary, and he gave brief, dismissive answers before steering the conversation back to religion. He asked if I'd thought about my own spiritual life, if I was ready to accept God. When I deflected or changed the subject, I could hear the disappointment in his voice. In May, he told me he was spending every evening at the church now, helping the pastor with various projects. He said his only real friend was the pastor, that the relationships he'd formed at work and in his building were superficial compared to the connection he felt with his church community. I asked what church it was specifically, what denomination, and he gave a vague answer about it being non-denominational. He was secretive about details, never mentioning the church's name or location. In June, he told me he was giving away his gaming console. A member of the church needed one, and he didn't have time for games anymore. I was upset, not about the console itself, but about what it represented. Gaming was how we stayed connected, our weekly tradition, the way we maintained our relationship across the distance. I told him that, and he said his priorities had changed. He said he was preparing for his future, for the arrival of his future wife. I thought he meant he'd met someone. I asked her name, and he said he hadn't met her yet, but he knew she was coming. He said he'd been having visions, premonitions about a woman who was meant to be his wife, someone he was destined to find. He described it with complete certainty, like he was talking about an established fact rather than a belief or a hope. He said she was waiting for him in another country and he'd be moving overseas soon to find her. I thought he was joking. I laughed and asked if he was serious. He said he'd never been more serious about anything in his life. He said this woman, his premonition wife as he called her, wouldn't approve of him spending time playing games with other women, even his sister. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. I asked if he was cutting me off. He said his future wife was more important than his relationship with me, that I needed to understand his priorities were with his spiritual family now. He spoke with absolute clarity, calm and certain, and that was the most terrifying part. He believed every word. My father called him the next day and asked directly if he had romantic feelings toward me, if that was why he was cutting off contact. My brother avoided the question, deflected, changed the subject. My father said that silence was an answer. My mother called me crying, saying she believed the church was controlling him, isolating him from his family, exploiting some vulnerability or psychological break. I didn't know what to think. I still don't. I haven't spoken to my brother in 5 months. I've tried texting and calling, but he doesn't respond. I searched online for information about the church, but without knowing its name or location, I found nothing useful. I miss who he used to be. I miss our conversations and our game nights and the easy closeness we had. I don't know if I'll ever get that relationship back. I don't know if the person I knew still exists underneath whatever's happened to him. The instructor's name was Glenn, and he taught the Tuesday evening pottery class at the community center. I'm a 41-year-old divorced accountant, and I'd signed up for the class because my therapist suggested I try a creative hobby, something that would get me out of the house and interacting with people. The divorce had been finalized 6 months earlier, and I'd spent most of that time alone, going to work and coming home and watching television until I fell asleep. My therapist said I needed to rebuild a life for myself, to find activities that brought me joy rather than just filling time. Glenn was in his mid-50s, friendly and patient with beginners. The class was small, maybe 8 people, and he'd walk around the room offering guidance and adjustments. He'd stand behind students and place his hands over theirs, helping them feel the right amount of pressure to apply to the clay, the right speed to turn the wheel. It felt instructional, appropriate. After the third session, he approached me as I was cleaning up and said I had a natural aptitude for ceramics. He said the group setting was holding me back and asked if I'd be interested in private lessons at his studio. He said I could progress much faster with one-on-one instruction. I was flattered. I agreed. His studio was in a converted garage behind his house in a quiet residential neighborhood. The first private lesson went well. He was more technical than he'd been in the group class, teaching me specific techniques for centering the clay and pulling up the walls of a cylinder. He explained the physics of it, the way force and motion work together. I felt like I was actually learning rather than just experimenting. The second lesson, he stood behind me with his hands over mine for most of the 2-hour session. I felt uncomfortable but told myself it was necessary, that this was how pottery was taught, through physical demonstration. The third lesson, he suggested I come earlier in the day, said he had more energy in the afternoon and could give me better instruction. I came at 2 on a Saturday. He offered me wine. I declined, saying it was too early. He poured himself a glass and drank 2 more while I worked. He started asking personal questions. He asked about my divorce, what had caused it, whether I was dating again. I kept my answers brief and tried to redirect the conversation back to pottery. He asked what I was looking for in a partner, what qualities mattered to me. I said I wasn't really looking for anyone right now. He said that was probably wise, that it was better to focus on myself and my own growth. Then he told me he was separated from his wife, that she'd moved out 3 months ago and he was living alone in the house. He said it was lonely, that he missed having someone to talk to. He touched my shoulder and said I seemed tense, that I should relax and enjoy the process. I moved away and said I was fine. He looked hurt, said he was only trying to help. I stopped going to the private lessons but continued with the Tuesday evening group class. Glenn's behavior changed immediately. He began ignoring me during the group sessions, walking past my station without offering any feedback or guidance. Then he started openly criticizing everything I made. He'd stand over my work and point out flaws, saying my proportions were off, or my walls were too thin, or my glazing was sloppy. Other students noticed. One woman, an older lady named Carol, asked me quietly if I was okay, if something had happened between Glenn and me. I said I was fine, but I knew I wasn't. The criticism continued for 3 more weeks. I stopped enjoying the class, started dreading Tuesday evenings. I quit and lost the deposit I'd paid for the full session. Glenn sent me an email saying he was disappointed I was giving up, that I'd shown so much promise and he'd invested significant time in helping me develop my skills. The email felt like an accusation. I saw Glenn at a grocery store 2 months later. I was in the produce section and looked up and he was standing at the end of the aisle, staring directly at me. I nodded in acknowledgement and he turned and walked away like he hadn't seen me. I don't go to that grocery store anymore. The message came through the climbing gym's social app at 11 at night. A user with no profile picture and a blank bio had sent me a friend request and a message saying they'd seen me at the gym earlier that day. I'm a 29-year-old physical therapist, and I go to the climbing gym 3 evenings a week after work. It's my primary form of exercise and stress relief. The message described what I'd been wearing, which routes I'd climbed, who I'd talked to in the bouldering area. I didn't recognize the username, a random string of letters and numbers. The level of detail was unsettling, but I told myself it might be someone who'd seen me around and was too shy to introduce themselves in person. I ignored the message. The next day, I got another message from the same account saying I'd looked frustrated on the blue overhang route, and they could give me some tips if I wanted to meet up. They said they'd been climbing for years and would be happy to help. Something about the phrasing felt wrong, the presumption of familiarity. I blocked the account. 2 days later, a different account with a similarly blank profile sent me a message saying they'd noticed I'd blocked their other account and asking why I was being unfriendly. They said they were just trying to be helpful and get to know me. I blocked that account too. A week passed without any messages, and I thought it was over. Then I was at the gym on a Thursday evening, and I felt like someone was watching me. I looked around but couldn't identify anyone paying particular attention. The gym was moderately crowded, people scattered across different areas. Everyone focused on their own climbs. But the feeling persisted, that prickle of awareness that comes from being observed. When I got home, there was another message from a third account. This one said I'd seemed nervous at the gym and asked if I was okay. It included a photo taken from across the gym showing me on the wall, my back to the camera. The photo was clear enough that I could see what I was wearing, which holds I was gripping. Someone had been watching me and photographing me without my knowledge. I reported all three accounts to the app administrators and sent screenshots to the gym. The gym manager said they took safety seriously and would review their security footage, but without knowing who was behind the accounts, they couldn't ban anyone. They said if I saw anyone acting suspiciously, I should alert staff immediately. The messages stopped for 3 weeks. I started to relax, thought maybe the person had lost interest or been scared off by my reports. Then I got a message from a new account with a single photo attached. It was a picture of my apartment building taken from across the street, the entrance clearly visible. The message said it must be convenient living so close to the gym and asked if I ever felt lonely there. I stared at the screen for a long time before replying and then decided not to answer at all. I took screenshots and filed a police report the next morning. The officer listened and nodded and said unless the person made a direct threat or tried to contact me in person, there was not much they could do. He suggested I vary my routine and be aware of my surroundings, which I already was. I stopped going to the gym at the same time every day and I took different routes home and parked in different spots in the garage. I checked my mirrors when I walked and looked behind me more than I ever had before. The messages stopped after that, but the silence felt just as heavy as the attention had been. I still think about whoever took that photo every time I unlock my door. The pattern in all of these experiences did not become clear to me until much later. It was never really about attraction or interest, it was about access. Every person who scared me had first asked for something small, a ride, a meeting, a favor, a moment of trust, and each time I gave it, the line moved a little farther away from where it had been. I do not think any of them saw themselves as dangerous. I think they felt entitled to my time and my presence and my attention and even my safety. And when I tried to take those things back, that was when they became frightening. I am more careful now, not paranoid, just aware. I do not hand over pieces of my life without asking why someone wants them. I lock my doors, I keep my routines loose, and I trust my discomfort when it shows up. It is not always right, but it has never been wrong about one thing. Something is wrong when a person needs more of you than you have chosen to give.